Many people notice that their mind sometimes begins imagining conversations that have not yet happened. A future interaction appears in thought, and the brain begins constructing a dialogue. One person speaks, another responds, and the exchange continues as if the conversation were unfolding in real time. Although the situation exists only in imagination, the sequence of speech may feel surprisingly detailed. The mind may imagine what someone might say, how the response might sound, and how the discussion could develop. Psychologists have studied this pattern because it reveals how the brain prepares for social interaction. Human communication involves many unpredictable elements. Words, tone of voice, and reactions can change the direction of a conversation quickly. To prepare for these uncertainties, the brain sometimes creates internal simulations of possible discussions. These imagined conversations allow the mind to explore how different responses might influence the interaction before the real event occurs. Prediction plays an important role in why the brain imagines conversations before they occur. The human mind constantly attempts to anticipate future events. Rather than waiting for situations to unfold, the brain often constructs expectations about what might happen next. This predictive ability helps people navigate complex social environments. When a conversation is expected in the near future, the brain may begin simulating the interaction internally. During this simulation, the mind explores possible questions, responses, and reactions. The imagined dialogue allows the brain to test different outcomes. One version of the conversation might unfold smoothly, while another may involve disagreement or confusion. By examining several possibilities, the mind attempts to understand how the interaction might develop. Imagined conversations therefore function as mental rehearsals that allow the brain to explore potential outcomes before the situation actually occurs. Language systems in the brain play a central role in how these imagined conversations unfold. Human thinking is closely connected to speech. Many thoughts appear as silent sentences, structured in a way that resembles ordinary dialogue. When the brain imagines a future conversation, it often uses the same language patterns that appear in real communication. The mind may silently generate both sides of the dialogue. One voice represents the individual's response, while the other voice represents the imagined reply of another person. Although both sides originate from the same mind, the exchange can feel like a genuine conversation. This pattern reflects how language organizes thought. By placing ideas into sentences, the brain creates a structure that allows it to explore interactions in detail. Social uncertainty also encourages the brain to imagine conversations ahead of time. Human interactions often involve interpreting subtle signals such as tone, facial expression, and body language. Because these signals can change quickly, the brain may attempt to anticipate how they might appear during an interaction. When a future discussion feels important or uncertain, the mind may begin constructing possible exchanges. Different scenarios may appear in sequence. One imagined conversation may unfold smoothly, while another might involve disagreement or misunderstanding. Through these imagined dialogues, the brain explores how the interaction could develop. This process allows the mind to examine multiple outcomes before the real conversation takes place. Imagined conversations, therefore, reflect how the brain studies social situations in advance. Memory also contributes to why imagined conversations feel so detailed. When the brain constructs a future interaction, it rarely creates the scenario from nothing. Instead, the mind draws from earlier experiences with similar situations. Past conversations, familiar voices, and remembered reactions provide building blocks for the imagined dialogue. The brain combines these fragments of memory with present expectations about the upcoming interaction. Through this process, the imagined conversation begins to resemble real communication. The mind may recall how a person usually speaks or how they typically respond during discussions. These remembered patterns help shape the dialogue that appears in thought. As a result, the imagined exchange often feels realistic. The brain is not simply inventing random words. It is assembling elements from previous experiences to create a plausible scenario about how the conversation might unfold. Imagination allows the brain to explore several versions of the same conversation. A person might imagine one response, then immediately consider how the discussion could change if a different sentence were spoken instead. Each variation creates a new path the interaction might follow. The brain examines these possibilities one after another, comparing how each version unfolds. In one imagined exchange, the conversation may remain calm and cooperative. In another version, the discussion may shift toward disagreement or confusion. Through these variations, the mind studies how small changes in language can influence the direction of communication. Imagined conversations therefore function as a series of mental experiments. Each version allows the brain to observe how different responses might shape the interaction before the real conversation takes place. Internal dialogue plays an important role in how these imagined conversations are organized. When the brain thinks using language, it often creates silent sentences that resemble spoken communication. During imagined discussions, this internal speech becomes structured as an exchange between two voices. One voice represents the individual's own response, while another represents the anticipated reply of the other person. Although both sides of the dialogue originate from the same mind, the structure of the exchange makes the conversation feel interactive. The brain is essentially simulating two perspectives at once. This structure allows the mind to examine the interaction more carefully. Each imagined response can be evaluated, adjusted, or replaced with another possibility. Internal dialogue, therefore, provides the framework that allows the brain to construct detailed conversational simulations. Quiet moments often provide the conditions in which imagined conversations appear most clearly. When attention is focused on demanding tasks, the brain tends to concentrate on immediate activity. However, during periods of rest or low external stimulation, the mind often turns toward reflection and imagination. In this reflective state, the brain may begin exploring upcoming interactions. A conversation scheduled for later in the day or in the near future can easily become the focus of attention. Without external distractions, the mind has the freedom to explore different possibilities in detail. The imagined dialogue may unfold gradually, with each sentence shaping the next response. Through this process, the brain continues examining how the interaction might develop once it actually occurs. Another reason the brain imagines conversations before they happen is the complexity of human communication. Unlike many other forms of behavior, conversations can change direction very quickly. A single sentence can shift the tone of an interaction, introduce a new idea, or create misunderstanding. Because language is flexible, the brain often tries to anticipate how different phrases might influence the discussion. During imagined conversations, the mind tests how various responses could shape the interaction. One sentence might lead to agreement, while another might produce confusion or disagreement. By comparing these possibilities, the brain studies how language affects social outcomes. The imagined dialogue becomes a way to explore the relationship between words and reactions. Through this process, the mind attempts to understand how communication might unfold once the conversation takes place. Attention also influences how vividly imagined conversations appear in thought. When a person expects an important interaction, the brain may begin focusing on the details of that upcoming event. The mind becomes sensitive to anything connected with the conversation. Small questions about what might be said or how someone might respond can easily capture attention. Once attention is directed toward the future discussion, the brain begins building a mental simulation. The imagined dialogue gradually develops as the mind explores how the conversation might progress. Because attention is focused so strongly on the situation, the imagined exchange can feel very detailed. The brain is allocating mental resources to study the interaction before it happens. This focused attention allows the simulation to unfold in a structured and realistic way. Emotion can also shape the way imagined conversations appear in the mind. Interactions that carry personal significance often become the subject of detailed mental simulations. If a conversation involves an important decision, a disagreement, or a meaningful relationship, the brain may examine the interaction more carefully. During these moments, the mind begins constructing possible dialogues in order to understand how the situation might develop. The imagined conversation may include different emotional tones. One version of the exchange may feel calm and cooperative, while another may involve tension or misunderstanding. By exploring these variations, the brain studies how emotion might influence the discussion. The simulation allows the mind to observe how different reactions could change the direction of the conversation. Imagination allows the brain to connect present expectations with future possibilities. When the mind anticipates a conversation, it often combines information from memory with ideas about what might happen next. Past interactions provide examples of how communication usually unfolds. These memories help shape the imagined dialogue that appears in thought. At the same time, the brain introduces new possibilities that have not yet occurred. The mind may imagine responses that have never been spoken before, or reactions that differ from previous experiences. By combining memory and imagination, the brain constructs a range of possible conversations. Each imagined version represents a potential path the interaction might take. This process allows the mind to explore future communication before it becomes reality. Another factor that leads the brain to imagine conversations ahead of time is the mind's search for clarity. Human interactions often contain small uncertainties. A person may wonder how someone will react, what they might say, or how a discussion might progress. When these questions remain unanswered, the brain often attempts to resolve them through imagination. The mind begins constructing possible exchanges that might explain how the interaction could unfold. Each imagined response becomes a way of testing one possible outcome. By exploring these possibilities internally, the brain reduces some of the uncertainty surrounding the upcoming interaction. The imagined dialogue, therefore, reflects the mind's attempt to bring structure to a situation that has not yet happened. Social awareness also plays an important role in these imagined discussions. Human communication requires understanding how words may be interpreted by others. During imagined conversations, the brain often simulates not only one speech but also the perspective of another person. The mind may attempt to anticipate how the other individual might respond or what they might think about a certain statement. By constructing both sides of the dialogue, the brain studies the interaction from multiple viewpoints. This perspective-taking ability allows the mind to examine how language might influence another person's reaction. Imagined conversations, therefore, reflect the brain's effort to understand communication from more than one perspective. Imagination also allows the brain to experiment with different ways of expressing ideas. During an imagined conversation, the mind may test several versions of the same message. One version might involve a direct statement, while another might use a softer or more indirect phrasing. Each variation creates a slightly different conversational path. The brain examines how these variations could influence the reaction of the other person. By comparing these possibilities, the mind studies how language shapes social interaction. This process resembles a series of small mental experiments. Each imagined sentence becomes a new version of the conversation that the brain can observe and analyze. The passage of time can also change how imagined conversations develop in the mind. As new information becomes available, the brain may adjust its simulation of the interaction. A person may remember something additional about the other individual or reconsider the purpose of the discussion. These changes influence the direction of the imagined dialogue. The brain modifies the conversation to reflect the updated understanding of the situation. Through this process, the simulation evolves as the mind gathers more information. Imagined conversations therefore remain flexible. They change as the brain continues analyzing the upcoming interaction. Another reason imagined conversations feel so realistic is that the brain activates many of the same systems involved in real speech. When people speak aloud, Areas of the brain responsible for language production and comprehension work together to organize sentences and interpret meaning. During imagined dialogue, these same language systems often become active even though no words are spoken. The mind silently generates sentences and anticipates responses as if the conversation were occurring in real time. Because the brain is using the same language structures, the imagined exchange can feel remarkably lifelike. The conversation unfolds in thought with a rhythm that resembles actual speech. Imagined conversations also demonstrate how strongly the brain relies on storytelling to understand future events. Human thinking often organizes experiences into sequences that resemble narratives. During a simulated discussion, the mind creates a beginning, a development, and a possible conclusion. The imagined dialogue becomes a short story about how the interaction might unfold. Each sentence leads to another response, gradually forming a complete scenario. This narrative structure allows the brain to examine the conversation from start to finish. By viewing the interaction as a sequence of events, the mind can explore how one moment might influence the next. Another element involved in imagined conversations is the brain's attention to timing. Communication often depends on when something is said as much as on what is said. During simulated dialogue, the mind may experiment with the timing of responses. The brain imagines how a pause, a quick reply, or a delayed reaction might influence the direction of the conversation. Each variation allows the mind to study how the rhythm of speech can shape interaction. These small adjustments help the brain understand how timing influences communication. Quiet environments often encourage the brain to generate these simulated discussions. When external activity slows and attention is not occupied by demanding tasks, the mind naturally turns inward. During this reflective state, memory and imagination interact more freely. Upcoming conversations may appear in thought because the brain now has the opportunity to examine them without distraction. The imagined dialogue unfolds gradually as the mind explores different possibilities. This reflective environment allows the simulation to become detailed and structured. From a psychological perspective, imagining conversations before they occur reveals how actively the brain studies social interaction. Human communication is complex and unpredictable. By simulating discussions internally, the mind can examine many possible outcomes without needing the real conversation to happen first. Each imagined dialogue becomes an opportunity to analyze language, reactions, and emotional tone. The brain compares different possibilities and observes how the interaction might evolve under different conditions. This process reflects the mind's effort to understand how communication operates within social environments. When viewed more broadly, the brain imagining conversations ahead of time becomes easier to understand. Human thinking constantly attempts to anticipate future situations. Communication is one of the most important forms of human interaction, so the mind naturally spends time examining how discussions might unfold. By constructing simulated dialogues, the brain explores possibilities before the event actually occurs. What feels like a simple daydream about an upcoming conversation is often part of a much larger cognitive process. The mind is studying language, reactions, and outcomes in order to better understand how social interactions develop. Imagined conversations therefore reveal how actively the human mind studies social interaction even before it takes place. The brain does not wait passively for communication to happen. Instead, it often begins exploring possible exchanges in advance, examining how words, tone, and reactions might influence the direction of a discussion. By constructing these internal dialogues, the mind can observe how different responses might shape the outcome of an interaction. One imagined version may lead to agreement, another may produce confusion, while a third may move the conversation in an entirely new direction. Through this process, the brain studies the structure of communication itself. Each imagined sentence becomes part of a simulation that helps the mind understand how language, timing, and emotion can influence social situations. What appears to be a simple imagined conversation is often the brain quietly analyzing how human interaction unfolds.